There is something most men have been doing their entire lives that they genuinely believe earns respect. They show up, they stay, they never leave. They bend, they accommodate, they absorb, and when pushed, they absorb more. They have been told that loyalty is attractive, that patience is a virtue, that the man who stays through everything is the man a woman will value above all others. And here is what game theory found when it actually ran the numbers. In every simulated experiment on cooperation and social dynamics, the player who cooperated unconditionally, who gave without condition, stayed without contingency, and committed without limit, was not respected. He was exploited. Not because the other player was cruel, but because the math demanded it. When there are no consequences to taking, taking becomes the rational move. Robert Axelrod proved this at the University of Michigan in 1984, and it changed how we understand every relationship you have ever been in. The first thing game theory teaches you is that being the nice guy is not a personality trait, it is a strategy. And like every strategy, it produces predictable results depending on the environment it operates in. Robert Axelrod spent 3 years at the University of Michigan studying exactly what those results looked like. In his landmark 1984 study, The Evolution of Cooperation, he ran a tournament. Hundreds of strategies competed against each other in a repeated prisoner's dilemma, a game where two players must choose, again and again, to cooperate or defect. The strategy that lost most consistently was not the most aggressive, it was the unconditional cooperator, the player who always cooperated, no matter what the other player did, no matter how many times they were taken from, kept giving, and the environment rewarded the players who exploited him. Think about what that means in practice. Every time you absorb bad behavior without consequence, you are not demonstrating love. You are teaching the person across from you that there is no cost to taking from you. You are cooperating unconditionally. And the math does not care about your intentions. The math responds to what you do. That which has no cost has no value. That is not cynicism. That is the first law. Section: The Credible Walk. Thomas Schelling was not thinking about relationships when he wrote The Strategy of Conflict in 1960. He was thinking about nuclear weapons and the Cold War. He was trying to understand why two superpowers capable of ending the world had chosen not to. And the answer he arrived at became so foundational to how we understand human decision-making that in 2005, the Nobel Committee awarded him the prize in economics for it. Schelling's insight was precise. The value of a threat is not determined by its severity, it is determined by its credibility. A country that says it will launch nuclear weapons if provoked, but everyone knows it never would, has no deterrent. The threat is weightless. But a country that has previously, demonstrably, crossed its own stated lines, that player changes every calculation in the room. Now translate that. The man who says he has standards but never enforces them has no standards. He has statements. The man who has once, quietly, without drama, without explanation, simply walked away from something that did not serve him, that man carries something in how he moves through the world that cannot be faked, cannot be performed, and cannot be taught by any self-improvement program. You do not need to threaten. You need to have walked. The walk is the proof. The proof is the credibility. The credibility is what commands respect. Section: The Scarcity Signal. In 1984, the same year Axelrod published his cooperation research, a psychologist named Cialdini published a book called Influence. It would go on to sell 5 million copies and become the most cited text in the psychology of persuasion. One of its core principles is scarcity. Cialdini demonstrated across dozens of studies that the perceived value of any object, experience, or person increases in proportion to how available it is. The less accessible, the more desired. Not because people are shallow, but because scarcity is a signal, and the brain was wired to read it before language existed. An animal that could not be found was harder to catch. A resource that appeared rarely was more precious. That cognitive architecture is still running in every human alive today. Most men misread this as a call to play games, to fake unavailability, to manufacture distance. That is not the point. The point is genuine investment in your own life. The man who is always reachable, always waiting, always prioritizing the relationship above every other demand on his attention, his presence carries no signal of value. But the man who is genuinely occupied, genuinely building, genuinely living a life that does not pause for the relationship to catch up, that man's presence is felt differently. His attention, when it arrives, means something. You cannot be both everywhere and irreplaceable. Section: The Reactance Effect. In 1966, a psychologist named Jack Brem published a theory that explained something every man has felt but never had language for. He called it psychological reactance. The principle is simple, but its implications are vast. When a person perceives that their freedom is being threatened, their freedom to choose, to move, to withdraw, they experience a strong automatic drive to restore that freedom. Not because they are being difficult, not because they are running from commitment, but because the psyche was designed to resist pressure. Every living organism with any degree of autonomy evolved this mechanism. And here is what this means for men in relationships. Every move that communicates need, every double message, every slight escalation in availability, every attempt to close the distance faster than she is moving toward you, registers in her nervous system as a constraint on her freedom. And her psyche pushes back, not consciously, not deliberately. It is reflexive. Most men, when they feel this withdrawal, interpret it as a signal to try harder, to give more, to close the gap with more effort, which confirms the original reactance and amplifies it. The solution is the opposite of instinct. Pull back, not as a tactic, as a genuine recalibration. Her withdrawal was not a rejection, it was a response to pressure. Remove the pressure. Watch what happens. Section: The Animus. Carl Jung spent decades studying what lies beneath the surface of human attraction. Not what people say they want, not what they consciously choose, but what the unconscious is actually looking for, the deep structural pattern that the psyche is always in every relationship trying to fulfill. In Aeon, published in 1951, Jung described a specific psychological concept he called the animus, the inner masculine figure present in the unconscious of every woman. This is not a preference, it is an archetype. It is the image of masculine wholeness, not perfection, but rootedness, self-possession, the man who does not require validation to know who he is. Most men, Jung observed, activate something else entirely. The need to be seen, to be chosen, to be confirmed by the woman in front of them. And every time that need is visible, the animus remains untouched. Here is what's harder to hear. You cannot manufacture this quality by reading about it. You cannot adopt it as a strategy. The animus does not respond to performance. It responds to truth. The only way to activate what Jung described is to become a man who is genuinely, unflinchingly rooted in himself, not as an identity to project outward, but as the quiet certainty from which everything else moves. That is not built in a weekend. That is built in years, but once built, nothing else competes with it. Section: The tit-for-tat principle. Go back to Axelrod's tournament for a moment. The strategy that won was not the most aggressive, it was not the most generous. It was tit-for-tat, a strategy submitted by the psychologist Anatole Rappaport that did 4 things consistently. It cooperated first, it mirrored whatever the other player did, it retaliated immediately when exploited, and it forgave completely once the other player returned to cooperation. That's it, 4 rules. And across hundreds of rounds against hundreds of strategies, it outperformed everything else. Axelrod described the winning formula as nice, retaliatory, forgiving, and clear. Think about the man those 4 words describe. He enters every situation willing to give. He matches the energy that's returned to him, warmth for warmth, distance for distance. He does not absorb bad behavior silently and accumulate resentment. He responds visibly, cleanly, without drama. And when the other person adjusts, he adjusts back, No grudges, no punishment, no long memory for slights. That man is not playing games. He is being honest in the only language that actually communicates to the parts of us that are older than words. The man who absorbs everything and says nothing is not being strong. He is teaching the people around him that there is no feedback loop. That which has no cost has no value. Match the energy. This is not pettiness. This is the law. Section: The Purpose Gravity. Viktor Frankl survived Auschwitz. He survived 3 other Nazi concentration camps. He lost his wife, his parents, and his brother. He watched men around him, stronger men, younger men, men with more physical resources than he had, break and die. And he spent the rest of his career trying to understand why some survived and others did not. In Man's Search for Meaning, published in 1946, Frankl wrote, "To those who have a why to live, they can bear with almost any how." He was not writing about relationships, he was writing about survival. But what he identified, the structural difference between a man with purpose and a man without it, is exactly what creates the quality that every principle in this video points back to. A man with a genuine mission does not orbit relationships. Relationships orbit him. Not because he is cold, not because he is unavailable, but because he is a man whose center of gravity is internal. He is building something. He is going somewhere. He is answerable to something larger than approval. And the human psyche, especially the part of it Jung called the animus, is drawn to that, the way everything is drawn to a center of mass. You cannot manufacture this by reading about it. You build it by finding the thing you would do even if no one was watching and doing it until it becomes who you are. A man with a mission does not beg for attention. Attention finds him. That is not strategy. That is physics. Outro. If you have made it this far, something in you recognized what this video was actually about. Not tactics, not games, not the cynical math of withholding affection. This was about something older and more serious than that. 7 different fields of knowledge: game theory, deterrent strategy, behavioral economics, reactance psychology, Jungian archetypes, evolutionary biology, and existential philosophy, all arrived at the same place through completely different roads. The man who is respected is the man who has a self that cannot be negotiated away. He cooperates, but not unconditionally. He gives, but not without limit. He is present, but not at the cost of everything else he is. He responds to what is offered. He has walked away before. He is going somewhere. Most men were never taught this. They were taught that love is demonstrated through sacrifice, that respect is earned through effort, that a good man absorbs. And that teaching produced generations of men who are appreciated without being respected, present without being felt, loyal without being valued. You do not have to be one of them, but becoming the other kind is not a strategy you adopt. It is a person you build, slowly, deliberately, through how you choose to live every day when no one is watching. That is where this begins, not in a relationship, in yourself.